Yo, I got a summertime confession. When I go to the cookout, I never volunteer to pray. Formal prayer isn't like really my jam. Like when I get together with my family, they always ask me to pray because I'm the preacher and I understand that, so I do it, but I never volunteer. Prayer just isn't my ministry. I rarely do formal prayers on my own time. And that's probably the main reason why I wouldn't be a Muslim, because I don't want to pray 5 times a day. That swine really got me in a chokehold because, bacon is life. But there's this book called Black Liturgies by a phenomenal human being named Cole Arthur Riley, which I feel like just makes prayer so easy because Cole writes what I want to say. So when I'm in my own personal time of reflection, or if I'm preparing to pray in a public space, I can go to Black Liturgies and get inspiration. And sometimes it's not even just inspiration. I just read what Cole wrote to everybody, and then I look like I'm a superstar because I sound so brilliant, when really they her words. I believe Black Liturgies is our generation's common book of prayers. I think every Black household should have a copy of this book. I think every Black community of faith should have a copy of this book, and not just the Black ones, but especially the Black ones. Black Liturgies is not tied to any one specific faith tradition, but it is so incredibly divine. I personally consider Black Liturgies to be sacred text. I put it right up there with All About Love by Bell Hooks and the Gospels in the Bible. I had the opportunity to host a fireside chat with Cole Arthur Riley, the author of Black Liturgies, recently at Eden Theological Seminary in St. Louis, Missouri. Now, just a heads up, the members of our digital community, the people who are subscribed to our ecosystem, had the opportunity to stream this interview in real time when we recorded it, and they've had access to stream the replay of it for the past couple of months. Wink, wink. So if you want to take advantage of those types of benefits and you want to support the important work that we're doing, go ahead and hit the link in the show notes and subscribe to our digital community. We're waiting on you. In this conversation with Cole Arthur Riley, we talked about the relationship between faith and fear. We talked about the relationship between religion and queerness. We talked about being Black. We talked about the genocide that's happening in Gaza. We talked about it all. So I want to welcome you to this special edition of Holy Smoke, Cigars, and Spirituality entitled Black Liturgies with Cole Arthur Riley. Now, of course, if you're listening to the podcast, I want you to know again, you have the option to watch our podcast recordings on YouTube now. We only release every other week, but when we do release, we're releasing a visual episode on YouTube as well. Just go to the tfc.virtual YouTube channel and you'll see this posted right there. All right, so you know what to do. Pull up a chair, light a stick if you want, pour a dram if you please, as we deconstruct harmful theology and build beloved community one cigar at a time. Let's get to it. My name is Christian A. Smith. I am the host and the heretic of the Holy Smoke, Cigars, and Spirituality podcast. Yes, if there are any podcast listeners out there, look up Holy Smoke, Cigars, and Spirituality. That's where we deconstruct harmful theology and build beloved community one cigar at a time. So tonight, it's going to be kind of like a more mellow version of Holy Smokes, because when we do Holy Smokes like in real time, basically we smoke, drink, cuss, and talk about life, faith, and theology. So we're not going to go like all the way there tonight, but we are going to have a great conversation. And in true Holy Smokes form, I got one rule for our time together tonight. Anytime I get together with my Holy Smokes crew and we do a podcast recording, we got one rule only. And that one rule is that we honor each other's lived experiences. I want to say that again. One rule, that we honor each other's lived experiences. So we don't uplift theory or doctrine over what someone else has actually lived. So in this space, when we come together, if somebody else's lived experience contradicts your theory or your doctrine, we're going to invite you to take that as an opportunity to learn from what they have lived. Is that fair? We can do that tonight. I felt like that was going to be all right. I mean, I've been around here long enough to understand the eating community is good with that. All in aesthetics and nature, and we have a very, very, very special guest that you all came to see tonight. She is our sacred liturgist, the author, the poet, the wordsmith, the gift to humanity. Can you put your hands together for our friend Cole Arthur Riley as she comes to the stage? And what mic do you want her to use? You just grab it. Mhm. So we're gonna have a little conversation together, just Cole and I, and then we're gonna invite up a few other panelists who will join us as well to finish out this conversation tonight. And if you have questions, an opportunity for you to ask your questions before the night is over. And I'll give this disclaimer: when we say we're going to invite you to ask your questions, that means we really want you to ask a question. I've been doing panels for a long time, and there's always like one or two people who get up with a 5-minute statement and don't ask a question. So I want you to be sure you think of your questions as we come together tonight. Cole, thank you so much for being here. Thank you for just existing.
Thank you for being here, and thank you all for being in this space together.
Yes, yes. So I was introduced to Black Liturgies when it started. I didn't realize that until I read the book, and you said in the book that it started around 2020, and that's when it was introduced to me, and we actually started incorporating it in our ministry in real time in 2020, and it was such a blessing to us. But the title of your book is so important, particularly because, like you said, you didn't explicitly talk about Blackness in the cover of This Here Flesh when you released that. So you were very explicit with putting Black on the cover of this. So can we just do a little game of word association?
Yes.
All right. So tell me what words come to mind when I throw out these words.
Okay.
What comes to mind when you hear the word Blackness?
Memory.
Mm. Please expand. Don't do that. You can't say memory in this. No, you
I
gotta.
thought you were gonna give more.
I was, but then you said memory, so we got to stop. And please expound on how memory is connected to Blackness for you.
I mean, it's for me, it's survival. It's how Blackness has survived. I think, yeah, in a world that has no shortage of resources and weapons and tools at its fingertips, to diminish Blackness, to have us forget, to kind of commit erasure, somehow Black people have found a way to be remembered, to hold their own memories in a society that is hell-bent on, a willful amnesia. And so anytime I think of Blackness, I think of everything it took in order to preserve it, in order for me to say the word now, and to have not been erased to this point.
Wow.
Mhm.
Yeah, that's good. It kind of makes me think about how our religion was taken from us when we were kidnapped and brought here and replaced with something else. And I believe right now in our generation, we're working to remember, right? We were dismembered from our heritage, and we're really working to remember the theology and spirituality that carried us over the transatlantic, that sustained us before we got here, before we knew of Christianity, before we knew of Jesus, before we knew of the Bible. We had something that carried us. And I think that's very powerful for us to be in a moment of remembering that right now. Okay. So we got Blackness. What words come to mind when you hear liturgy?
Rhythm.
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 Please expound.
If you're familiar with the language of liturgy, I think most of us kind of imagine a Catholic mass or like an Anglican rite, an Episcopal rite. When you strip when you strip those things away, those impressions away, I think at its core, it's this rhythm, this form for connecting with the divine, however that form can look like. I think one thing it demands is a kind of rhythm to it, a kind of regular practice of it. And I think that's how we kind of organize our lives, or I would say a healthy way to organize our lives is through regular commitment to something, even if it feels uncomfortable. It's not to say that we're static in our spiritual practices, but that we have some liturgy, I think, implies some commitment to a spiritual practice or to an attempt at communing with the divine.
Yeah, we're creatures of habit. Mm-hmm. So it's good to have a rhythm. And mm-hmm. I think rhythm applies to liturgy and Blackness because, you know, that's a part of the Black experience. You got to have some rhythm in there somewhere in some shape, form, or fashion. All right. So what words come to mind when you hear the word faith?
Fear.
You and these words.
I've never done word association. I feel like my whole life is waiting. So that is the first thing that came to my mind. Genuinely, I think when people ask me about my faith, when people ask me to define my faith, I feel a sense of fear. I feel something in kind of like the pit of my stomach, a resistance or an awareness that I haven't always been safe in spaces of faith.
Yeah.
And so there's this hesitancy, and I think part of that is born of trauma, and I think part of that is born of wisdom, a hesitancy of, what that word kind of evokes.
Yeah, you wrote about that in Black Liturgies, how our fear is sacred and how we shouldn't try to avoid our fear, but really embrace the reality of it. Can you kind of like expound on that a little bit?
Yeah. It's not an original thought. It came from my father, who I'm a very scared person, and I always have been. Just scared of everything. When I was a child, I was scared of my own shadow and walked around with my shoulders against my ears. And my father would say, "Let the fear in. Don't let it control you." Like, and there's this moment that I write about in This Here Flesh where I'm climbing this rock wall and all the other kids can do it, but me and my scared, 10-year-old self couldn't. And he straps in, gets on belay, and he starts climbing the rock wall with me. And he's saying, "Let the fear in, don't let it control you." And that is a message he has. I never received the message in my household that fear is something that you should just conquer, which I think is the way many of us have been trained. We're trained to conquer our fears, to tell our children to conquer their fears. Instead, I think I learned a framework of kind of rising to meet it and becoming curious about it. And I think my father in particular was always very careful not to force me to go places that I wasn't ready to go. And whether or not he would articulate it this way, I think he knew that, some fears will save your life. And me as a little Black girl, some fears are going to save my life. You as a young Black boy, some fears. And so I think there are those of us who we just can't afford this myth of fearlessness, this myth of waiting, this myth of conquering. It has to be complicated more into listening, into curiosity, sometimes rising to meet it, sometimes knowing when to flee,
You just brought up a great point, because I get real concerned when I meet Black people who don't know they're in danger. Like, how do you not realize we're in danger all the time?
Yes.
Absolutely. All right, so last word. What comes to mind when you hear the word nature?
Beauty.
Yes. Tell me where you see beauty in nature.
I'm interested in kind of the grand beauties, the picturesque scenes. I do enjoy hiking when my body can take it. But when I became sick, I live with chronic illness. I was limited some. So I hiked the Himalayas in my 20s. I went from being in it, did a trip to Alaska and helped volunteered at the Iditarod dog sled race. And, I went from in it to being someone who, I mostly spend my time in bed, my days in bed, and I've had to adjust how I find beauty in nature, apart from just the grand and the majestic, and really have had to find beauty in the mundane, and kind of zeroing in and becoming smaller in a way, and looking at the ants kind of carrying their things together, or staring at I live on land with a barn, staring at the barn swallows outside of my window. And I'm learning a kind of connection to nature that's about beauty in those mundane moments.
I just think there's so much beauty in that level of awareness. Do y'all agree? Like, to have that kind of awareness where, like, I can't engage the majestic splendor, so let me zero in on the mundane. And that's where, in my practice of business and entrepreneurship, that's where success is, in the mundane. One of the articles that really changed my way of thinking early on in my career was an article called The Mundanity of Success. Mm-hmm. That to be successful in a thing, you have to focus on the mundane stuff that people generally overlook. And I believe that speaks to how you're able to capture the beauty of holiness, really, is what I believe you do in your words, because you focus on the mundane. And many of us don't do that. So I think that speaks to your work and how effective it is.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. So let's get into Black Liturgies. All right, because I believe this is what Black folk need. Like, whether you're Christian, Muslim, atheist, agnostic, don't identify as anything, whatever, I believe this is a blessing to us all, because it helps us to look within ourselves in ways that other structures in society don't allow us to do. And you put such a heavy emphasis on Blackness, which I love. I was like, man, when I was reading your book, I was like, man, Cole is blackety black, like black, and I love it. So how has your relationship to Blackness evolved over the course of your life?
It's been a journey. I went to predominantly Black schools my whole life, but my classroom in particular was never predominantly Black. I would say since first grade, I was never and I've never, in all of my years up until college, I never had a Black teacher.
Oh, wow.
So
you went to mostly Black schools?
Mostly Black schools, but the classrooms that I was in were white. I was in the gifted program, which we know is, systemically unjust and doesn't care about Black people. I was a quiet Black person, and they like those. They like those. They're gifted programs. So they said, throw her in. So I had a complicated relationship to my Blackness in that I was super shy. I wasn't a verbal kid, and desperate to belong, and yet couldn't make the journey to really meet other Black people at recess, in the cafeteria. I sat by myself. I lived a pretty solitary life, honestly, up until late high school, early college.
Yeah.
And so I think I had a relationship to Blackness that was grounded in my family and my grandma. I was raised by kind of a village. We lived with grandmas, aunts, uncles, off and on. We didn't have a kind of insular household. And, my dad, we grew up every morning hearing, "We're beautiful. You look good. Do you feel good?" We had all these rituals around, I think, Black reverence for the Black body. But it really wasn't until later in life, and through Black liturgies, I think, especially, I've kind of been able to take more risks and become more brave and entering the Black collective and a greater collective outside of my family, and have kind of taken refuge in Black art and Black fiction and Black poets, and even in the community of Black liturgies, to know I don't have to live this solitary Black existence. Yeah, I won't survive very long like that.
Yeah, that's beautiful. So really, Black liturgies was a turning point in your journey. Is that what you're saying? Like, something significant happened in your relationship to Blackness when you had the inspiration to do this?
In a way, yeah. I mean, I had my kind of insular friends. I keep my circles small.
That's good wisdom.
Yeah, partially because I'm shy, but I think as I've gotten older, partially like a wisdom. So, obviously I have Black friends, but in terms of really recognizing the necessity of a greater Black collective and not just participating in it through books, So I was in my head and kind of living in the confines of, okay, I'm connecting with Toni Morrison. I'm there in the clearing with, baby Suggs and, and that's beautiful to a point, but you won't survive by it. And I think Black Liturgies allowed me to kind of reimagine a greater, a collective Black interior, not a monolith, but to say that, when I'm conceiving of my own interior world, I can only do that. I can only make that journey if I'm journeying with other people who are journeying. And if I'm prepared to practice imagination, as Toni Morrison says, for your interior world. And yeah, I just thought I could survive alone. I thought I would live my whole life just kind of two friends and on an island with beloved and Sula, and it's no way.
Yeah.
No way. Yeah.
We're not made to exist in isolation.
Mm-hmm.
That's why solitary confinement is considered torture.
Mm-hmm.
Because we are communal beings by nature. When we consider Maslow's hierarchy of needs, the base level is food, air, water. The next level of necessity is safety and security, so like healthcare. And then the next level, right above that, is companionship. Like we need the first two levels for our survival. We need that companionship level for our sanity. Like we go insane without connection to other people. So I completely understand how like your journey in Blackness was expanded when you expanded that community.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, thank God you did, because I mean, it's been such a blessing to us for real. But I've heard you talk about, yes, give her a hand. Yeah. I've heard you talk about the interior life before, and maybe some people here haven't heard you talk about that explicitly. Can you talk about what you mean when you say that Black interior life?
Yeah. What I mean to say is that there are worlds in each of us. There's the exterior world that we're interfacing with every day, but in us, there are worlds and kind of multitudes of. When I think about the interior, I'm thinking about emotions. I'm thinking about grief, rage, joy. I'm also thinking about stories and the stories that live in us, somewhere in us, even stories that we tuck away and places that we maybe hesitate to go. I'm talking about desires, hungers, fears, the kind of unseen things that drive us in the world. And I mean, Toni Morrison in The Source of Self-Regard, she has this essay, it's actually The Site of Memory, where she talks about practicing imagination for the interior lives of her ancestors. And she's criticizing a very particular time in literature where Black people, specifically narratives of enslaved Black people, were beginning to show up in literature. They're beginning to show up on page for kind of the first time in meaningful ways. But her critique was they're showing up completely devoid of an interior life. They're showing up just in the body and almost as shells. And so she talks about practicing this journey of imagination into the interior lives of the people that she's come from. And she says, they are my entrance, that they are my entrance into my own interior world and my own imagination of a life in a world that was not written. And I take that seriously, to think that I mean, we know the ways that Black people are reduced to one-dimensional caricatures. And I don't think we need to spend all of our energy fighting against other people's, caricatures of us. But it is to say, anytime we reclaim Black interiority and, create art out of Black interiority, it's a kind of reclamation and a project of preservation to say we're not one-dimensional. There's complicated feelings, hungers, faults in us.
Just a quick reminder that if you're not subscribed to our digital community, you're only getting half of our episodes. We record enough episodes to release one one every single week, but we only release every other week because of the amount of labor that goes into releasing every single week. And to be honest, even the episodes that we do release to the general public, we don't release the pre-show. And you ask anybody in our digital community, the pre-show of each episode is an episode in and of itself. So really, if you're not subscribed to our digital community, you're getting like 25% of the podcast content that we record. So if you want to take advantage of that and you want to help support the work that we're doing in a meaningful way so we can sustain it, go ahead, hit up holysmokesmovement.com, click join our digital community, or if you want to support in another way, go ahead and pick up some of that merch. Again, just go to holysmokesmovement.com. All right, let's go ahead and get back to the conversation. Bye. Yeah. And I gotta shout out you and other Black women for leading the way on that, because Black men suck with the interior life. I mean, we're horrible. Like we avoid our emotions like the plague, you know? So shout out to you and all the Black women who are showing us the way to engage an interior life. Because I can say getting in touch with my emotions was the best thing that ever happened to me. The best thing that ever happened to me, because it's increased my awareness of who I am in so many ways that I would have never known if I just continue to think that the only acceptable emotions for me are anger and laughter. Like, you know, I remember the first time as a Black man, I said that hurt my feelings, and it felt weird. It felt weird, like, dang, I've never said that before. But obviously my feelings have been hurt so many times, but I never felt the freedom to say that. Yeah. And it has really changed my life. And I wouldn't have gotten there without Black women. So yeah, I appreciate you all for leading the way in that. Let's pivot to another portion of the book that I thought was just really, really profound. And I want you to expand on it because you talked about how we strip religion of its queerness. What does that mean?
Yeah, I mean, we want, not all of us, but I'll say we're trained to want clarity. We're trained to want something constant, unchanging, unmoving, you know. And I think in some ways that brings some of us a lot of comfort to think, okay, God or the divine is this static, clear, precise thing. And I think religion often can try to, I don't know, zoom in and bring into focus, make clear that which is ultimately a mystery. And extremely fluid and extremely uncertain in order to, I don't know, pacify us, maybe in order to make us feel a little more comforted. But it doesn't serve us. That it doesn't serve me, at least. I want a God. I want a divine force that is precise. That for me, that's a lot easier to believe in, to kind of muster belief in, than someone who's claiming to believe with precision exactly who God is, exactly what God thinks and wants. And I think if we inject queerness or kind of allow queerness to kind of thrive in our imaginations for the divine, you get a lot more fluidity, a lot more open-handedness, a lot more curiosity, a lot more interior excavation, you know, figuring out what's going on in us, as opposed to this kind of close-handed, I have them. This is God. This is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yeah.
Absolutely. Because people like to keep it static because it maintains the status quo. So people in power appreciate or push for a static faith because then I can maintain my position of power.
Yes.
Whatever that is. And particularly in the Black church, it's really not even power, it's proximity to power. And so it's like, no, don't change anything. Don't touch anything. Queer is bad. Don't be different. Everybody just stay right here because this is what works for me.
Yes.
And you're right. That's not faith. That's not spirituality. That's not theology. Theology is not an exact science. It's abstract. We're talking about ideas that are beyond our comprehension, and we're just doing our best to grasp at these concepts. So the level of spiritual arrogance you must have to think you have figured out God is amazing to me.
Yes. And yes. And useful, like you said, useful to certain people. It is an offshoot of supremacy, certainly white supremacy, that some of us have been trained to say, this is God and this is the only conception of God that matters. I don't just believe, I believe my belief is supreme. It has to reign supreme. It has to be the only truth. And I think that is the formation of whiteness. That is the formation of white supremacy in our spiritual lives, to say, my belief isn't enough in and of itself. I need it to be number one. I need it to be the only true thing.
Yes. If you need to diminish somebody else's faith to justify your beliefs, you need to change your religion. It's not a religion worth practicing if everybody else has to be wrong in order for you to be right. And that's another, extension of whiteness, this idea of binary thinking, that everything has to be either or. Either is this or it's that. Either you in or you out. Either you hot or you cold. Because y'all know God don't want no lukewarm Christians, right? And it's like the world is so much more nuanced than that. And I believe that's what Black Liturgies helps us to do. It helps us to embrace that nuance that is already a part of life. We just ignore it too frequently. And some of us just downright reject it, and even going beyond ignoring it. So one thing about Black Liturgies that I appreciate is that you give us these moments of reflection. Who has Black Liturgies in your possession already? All right. If you don't have it, before the night is over, you need to have it. All right. So I'm from the Black church, so I need somebody to say amen to that. Before the night is over, she done came all the way out here to talk to us tonight. Go and get the book. All right. Will you sign them tonight?
Yes.
All right. She'll sign them and everything. So you encourage us in the book to reflect, to be more contemplative. And you ask some really good questions. And I want to ask you one of your questions, because your presentation is very subdued. And I've listened, so I don't read books. I listen on Audible because I just don't have the attention span for read. I never like reading. People make fun of me all the time because it's like, how you an author and you don't read books? Like, don't judge me, because that's just my life. Let me live. And you're very subdued in your presentation, and I wondered to myself, what is Cole like when she gets angry? And there's a question you ask in the book, and I want to just present your question right back to you. What is your relationship with anger in this season? And in what ways are you conditioned to suppression?
I'll answer the second part first. I've been very well trained at suppression, and I think being someone who has throughout my life been quite shy. You say subdued, others would say boring. I wouldn't recommend the Audible of Black Liturgies. Get the book. I don't know what he's doing. But I've been, for most of my life, mostly pretty subdued, pretty timid. And it because I think rage and good rage requires a confidence and a courage that not everyone has. I think it takes real courage to bring that level of fire into a conversation, and to actually, my grandma and I would say that rage is a connective force. It's not apathy, which is inherently disconnecting. She says rage comes for you. It's a gesture toward, and I've been trained in retreat. So yeah, I would say historically I've not practiced anger well. I've really tried to mask it, disguise it with other things, distract myself, isolate. Um, right now, I'm trying to let my anger be louder and be these moments of loudness in my life, but still authentic. This is gonna sound like corny, but I write about this in Black Liturgies, so you'll figure it out anyways. But every New Year's, my friends and I get together, and one of our New Year's traditions is rage screaming, outside for 60 seconds. And I think what began as kind of a corny practice of connecting with, all of the anger of the past year, actually, I think is really a beautiful embodied, expression that I need. I'll say my default, if I'm honest, is very emotionally dead. It's like I'll try to say the meanest, cruelest thing possible with the least amount of affect in my face. And hope that I destroy someone else. And that's just not really helpful for anyone ever. And it's not honoring the full depth of what I'm feeling as well. So bringing some more kind of, well, I'll say the rage chapter in this here flesh, it's the only chapter that required a massive rewrite. The other ones, the editors pretty much they didn't really do much to. Rage, I wrote an entire chapter on rage and managed to not feel any. So it was just this purely intellectual exercise, and you could tell when I look back at those first drafts. And I had to go to places, in myself, in my own story. I didn't have any stories about myself in the rage chapter. It was just my dad and my grandma. But I had to go to places in myself that I think required courage and a different kind of vulnerability.
Yeah, there were a couple of moments. Like I said, I have the audiobook, so I'm listening to Cole in my ear. And there were a couple of moments where you made statements that were very passionate, but you like played it real cool. Like you dropped the F-bomb one time, and I had to go back. I was like, did Cole just cuss? And I went back and I was like, yeah, she said it with her whole chest, but it was still real, like, like I'm just gonna drop this and keep moving. And then you had a part where, because I have another question. I want to know what makes you laugh, because you made a joke when you were talking about all the names you've been called. And you said like I was Nikki, but that didn't fit. They called me Nick. And then I think you said Nickelback was one of the names. And you were like, that was a tragedy. I was like, how did she not laugh at herself when she said that? So like, what type of things make you laugh?
Well, I don't I mean, I don't consider myself a funny person. Actually, earlier this morning, I just sent a text to my friend. We were talking about a sitcom that needs to be written, and I said, "I'm not funny or else I'd write it." And they're like, "You're funny." I'm like, "You don't have to say that." I'm completely okay with not being a funny person. Every other person in my family is verifiably hilarious. Like they're just so good at reading a room, at playing up a story. I don't quite have that same zest, but I've been around it enough to like I know how to laugh. Even if it doesn't always originate with me. So my family makes me laugh a lot. I think people don't tend to make fun of me because I can seem quite subdued. But I like a roast. I like when people I love that about blackness, that black
You
people
like a
will
roast?
yeah, I like that black people will tell you about yourself. I saw this meme that was like black people will tell you a whole statement by just saying an item of clothing. Like, okay, sunglasses.
Yes.
Okay, turtleneck. Okay. And you don't know, like you have to wait to hear their inflection to know is that a good or
Right.
bad. So yes, I do laugh, but I think my public persona can be quite serious, and yeah.
Yeah. Like that is blackness, right? You can say the same statement with so many inflections and it means something different every time. Every time, right? Because I could see somebody on the street and be like, all right now, and you know what that means if you're black. And then I could say, all right now. Now you know what that means. Like, don't push any further, right? Because of the inflection in the tone. So you also wrote about something so profound, and I want you to expand on it for us. You said our liturgies begin with dignity because dignity is where any kind of liberation begins. What experiences in your life have led you to that conclusion?
I think experiences where I was content to kind of remain in spaces that actually hated me, hated my blackness, hated my queerness, but I would tolerate them. And I think this is an accusation toward myself, who is one person to kind of stand up to a sea of, anti-Blackness and homophobia. But it is to say that my appetite for liberation was completely atrophied. My appetite for something more, for beauty and love and goodness, because I had gotten so far away from true belief in my own dignity and what I was worthy of. I turned against the body, I turned against emotions and became whatever I needed to become to retain belonging in certain spaces. And I think dignity for me, as opposed to, pain, trauma, which is what we're often reduced to when people are finally interested in buying a Black book or learning about the Black experience. They want what's grotesque, they want the gruesome. I'm just interested in that, again, that one-dimensional rendering of Blackness. And if we start at dignity, I think there's something inherently dignifying to say, actually, we have an inherent good, we have an inherent beauty. And if you don't possess belief in that, you will become acquainted, you will become accustomed to all kinds of terror, all kinds of degradation, and you will learn to accept it. Asada Shakur says this, Audre Lorde says it, the less you think about your own oppression, the more you become used to it. And so to know what you're worthy of is the beginning, I think, of getting to that place, of moving toward that place of liberation.
Yeah, and can you give her a hand for that? That was good. And it makes me think about our journey in this country as Black people and how whiteness has attempted to strip us of our dignity since we got here, and how much of that has influenced our experience, which is why I think it's important for us to acknowledge what's happening in Gaza, what's happening in the West Bank, because that's how that happens. That's how you can annihilate 30,000 people when you strip them of their dignity, when you don't even see them as human. It's like humanity comes infused with dignity. And if you strip people of their dignity, then you erase their humanity. And I believe we as a people should be able to identify with that in meaningful ways with what is happening. And I know that's something that you're passionate about, because I know that when you did your video on Instagram, y'all follow Cole on Instagram, Cole Arthur Riley, Black Liturgies. Those are the two pages. Do you have any other pages?
No.
Okay. So y'all follow her on Instagram. And when you released the book into the world, you went live or you recorded a video and you were like, I've been struggling to record this because, I want to be happy, but what's going on right now? Can you like just talk a little bit more about that, how that dignity piece plays in with your passion about what's happening in Gaza?
Yeah. I mean, I think you're absolutely right. The reason why the horrors that we see in Gaza are still happening is because there's a complete disregard for humanity and a different standard of humanity for different people in the world, based on all kinds of things. Yeah, for me, yeah, Black Liturgies came out in January, and I mean, the genocide, October 7th. So I'd been in it. I'd been posting what I could, amplifying, voices, and realizing that there are people who are encountering my work, the Black Liturgies, and believing that that project has nothing to do with what's happening in Gaza. And I get DMs. I try not to read all of them, but I get them, and you really, it becomes clear that people truly believe that these liberation struggles are distinct, that they occur in a vacuum. And I think I posted that video in part because I was feeling a little bit of guilt that I didn't really need to feel. It wasn't, but in part because I'm trying to communicate that when I'm talking about Black liberation, I do not mean a liberation that exists in a vacuum. I mean to say that my freedom has, and I'm not the first to say this. Again, Audre Lorde, Bell Hooks, Toni Morris, and James Paul, they all, I mean, are the people that we come from, have said and said again, and trained us to be, for this moment, to be attuned and pay attention, and to realize that when, we've seen mothers carry their children in pieces, that it should absolutely stir the Black consciousness. It should absolutely stir us to know that that what they will do to them, they will do to us. And if they wouldn't do it to us, it doesn't matter if it's being done to anyone. Um, our liberation is at stake. So I am a part of that tradition who believes we get free together. But I feel like I'm up against um a lot of impressions of liberation that want to kind of put a hierarchy on whose struggle matters most. And I'm not interested in that so much. I will say that, as we talk about the people who try to strip people of dignity and what's happening in Gaza specifically, I think I've become more firm of something really interesting happens when you try to strip someone else of their dignity, or when you perpetuate, policies and donate weapons. It's not their dignity that really is at stake. It's ours. It's the dignity of whoever's pulling the trigger, whoever's launching the bomb. Something um, absolutely atrophies in the human heart and in our souls. This I believe with every year, like with more and more certainty, that it's never the dignity of the oppressed that's at stake. It's the dignity of the oppressor and who they're going to be in the world. Um, I think that's the decision we're trying to, see people make, and obviously miserably fail at their own humanity.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I believe that when you dehumanize others, you're actually dehumanizing yourself.
Mhm.
Because that's not what humanity looks like.
Mhm.
Not in its beauty and its splendor. And many of us who come from a church background come from this belief that we're just filthy rags.
Mhm.
That we're pitiful, and we are nothing without this God outside of us to come and save us.
Mhm.
But I don't believe that should be the core of anybody's theology, because we're not innately corrupt beings. We're innately complex.
Mhm.
We have capacity for good and for evil, and we choose what to nurture. And sometimes those choices are made for us. And then we have to lean into that courage to start making choices for ourselves, because we don't have to lean into the I'm nothing, I'm a filthy rag, like this idea that, if it wasn't for hell, I wouldn't be a good person. Then you're not a good person. You're not a good person. You're just a bad person on a leash. If like that's no.
Yeah.
So as we bring this portion of the conversation to a close, just tell us, like, what has been some of the most memorable feedback you received so far about Black Liturgies?
Um, I had a family who told me that they just had a baby, and their kind of 8 or 9-year-old child read a prayer over their newborn baby. And I don't know, I don't wanna sound, like, overly sentimental, but, I'm a big fan of kids and a big fan of the mischief and wonder, and I don't mean to put all of our hopes and dreams on children, but I do think that they're just remarkable and that they're able to retain imagination for beauty and goodness when we just can't. And so hearing that my words were in some way being encountered by kids, I think has been, like, the most beautiful thing, apart from, I think, trans people encountering my work. And I there's a prayer in particular that I wrote for trans lives, and it took me the longest to write, and I wanted to do it justice for people in my life. And so when I hear people have engaged with that prayer, that it's spread in some way, I feel proud.
Yeah, that's cool. And I saw firsthand how much Cole loves kids, because and no offense was taken by this. I actually loved it, because we were sitting having a conversation before we came up here, and you're very intentional. You were facing me, we were having a conversation, and then the little girl came up and got your attention, and you went, yeah. So I was like, you better give her your attention. You better turn around and give her all the attention.
She took me right to the cupcakes. We were gone.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Can you give Cole a hand? And we're not done. We're going to continue this conversation, but I did want to leave opportunity if there are two people who would like to ask a question before we invite our other panelists up. I want to leave room for two people to ask a question. What I need you to do is come up here to the front. We're going to give you a mic, and you can ask your question of Cole before we move forward. We're going to have the Dean of Eden Theological Seminary come up. Yes, we got one right here. Are we going to bring you the mic?
Okay.
Tell us your name and ask us your question.
Hi, thank you so much for being here. My name's Aisha. I also go by El Panthera. And so I had no idea that you were queer until this moment. And as a fellow queer woman, I would love to understand why you remain in the faith. Like, what is it that keeps you in faith? Because I struggle.
Yeah. Well, I certainly don't want to convince anyone to. I'll preface this by saying go where you're safe, and if that is Christian spaces, a Christian space near you, then sure. But if it's not, I don't feel the need to convince you otherwise. For me, I tend not to use the language of faith, maybe because it evokes fear when we did word association. But I find a lot of meaning in kind of Christian traditions and Christian stories, and I'm trying not to run from that formation altogether, but instead kind of complicate it, allow it to contain questions, and allow it to not completely define my whole sense of spirituality. We were talking earlier that I think Christianity is one aspect of my spirituality, and I think there are others that I was raised in. I wasn't raised in a Christian family, and there are spiritualities that I inherited from them, like storytelling, like myth, that are just as valuable to me. So I think if I've survived in Christian spaces, it's because I have other spaces as well that are giving me an imagination for a spirituality that isn't trying to control me. I've also found people in places that just aren't very concerned about what doctrine or creed I profess. They're not threatened by my unbelief, and that has been really liberating for me personally. If you belong to a spiritual space, Christian or otherwise, that demands you believe and think all the same things as its leaders in order to retain belonging, I would say that is not belonging, it's bondage. You should flee. You should flee those places. And I say that specifically in regards to the question about queerness, because I think it's not to say it's not without a cost. It is. It's costly to leave those spaces, but we can't let our entire spiritual kind of condition be defined by what will help us retain belonging at a table that wasn't meant for us, you know?
Yes. And if there's anybody else that has a question, we'll take one more question if you want to come up. But you just made me think about a couple of things, because belonging is what a lot of people are looking for right now. Like, my ministry is specifically to people who are unchurched, underchurched, and overchurched. And the biggest pocket of my target is overchurched people. People who are like, I'm over it. I'm done. I don't want to do this thing anymore. Get away from me. But there's still a longing to belong somewhere, because that's what church provides for so many of us. I'm a 5th generation Baptist preacher. Now, people probably wouldn't call me a Baptist preacher now because I'm so heretical. But yeah, like, I've been in church most of my life. And more than anything, I believe the church provides community for people. It provides belonging. But I try to tell people all the time, don't give yourself away to somebody else if you don't belong to yourself. You got to belong to you first. Because if you detach from yourself to belong to somebody else, you've given away all of your autonomy. You've given away all of your agency. You've given away all of your dignity. And we have to get out of the mindset in our communities of faith that to be unified, we have to be uniform. Because unity doesn't require uniformity. We can all come as our full, authentic selves and still be able to see the divine in each other while we recognize it in ourselves as well. So I really appreciate you, because that safety piece, if you're not safe, you're in the wrong place. Anybody else? Question? You got one more question? Anybody? Okay.
I know you probably can't see me. JT Snipes. So, oh, good. Thank you. We'll step forward. One, thank you for two of your texts. I've read the This Here Flesh, the chapter on wonder I assigned to my students in a research methods class to invite us to think about inquiry. And that's the only text that they talk about from the class. So thank you for that. My question is about liturgy in and of itself. I think about my introduction to liturgy is through the Book of Common Prayers. And I think about the history, like hundreds of years of sort of disciplining us and uniting us in the faith. So my question is about the future. What do you see for the future of this text of Black Liturgies? And how do you imagine people picking it up in the future?
I think, thank you for that question. Yeah, my first introduction to liturgy or liturgy by that name was the Book of Common Prayer, which, if you don't know, it was written by a man named Thomas Cranmer in the 15th or 16th century. And we know what was happening to people that looked like me in that time when he wrote the Book of Common Prayer. So there are limits to it, but I would say those limits, in some ways, I think extend to Black liturgies because it was written by me. It was written by a singular voice, and I try to be careful without being self-deprecating, try to be careful to not replicate a problem of a singular voice as kind of the end all be all in terms of connecting with the divine. I just don't think that's it. I think if we had 100 Black liturgies written by 100 of us, it wouldn't be enough. So I think my vision would be that other people would want to contribute to kind of we've always done it, but to contribute to kind of this physical archive of Black prayer, of Black interior excavation, in spiritual kind of landscapes that can be preserved. Not Black liturgies alone, but Black liturgies plus, 1,000 other prayer books written out of the Black interior.
Quick before you go, thank you so much for taking the time to listen to this. We hope that it was helpful. Whatever platform you're on, go ahead and subscribe, follow, like, whatever that platform calls for. And if you want to hang out with us in person, mark your calendars right now for the last weekend of August 23rd through the 25th. We're having Day Fest in Atlanta. Day is spelled DAI, and it stands for Disruptive, Authentic, Inclusive. Day Fest is like the most unconventional church anniversary you'll ever experience. It's for people in our Holy Smokes community, people in the faith community at large. We get together. It's like a family reunion. It's like a cookout with extended cousins. So the last words for the day are going to come from Kirkland Big Sexy to tell you a little bit about his Day Fest experience. If you want to be a part of it, go ahead and visit thefaithcommunity.org, and then under the shop tab, click Day Fest registration. It's live right now. Meet us August 23rd through the 25th in Atlanta. We would love to see you there.
All right, Kirkland, tell me about your Day Fest experience.
We done had some good ass food. Oh, can I curse? Can I start over? So far, I've had a great experience. I've got to live a life I didn't think I was going to live. So we went from hanging out on Friday, we had church on Saturday, then we talked about sex earlier today, and now we drinking drinks and eating jollof and smoking cigars. Like, all while the Lord is in the center. I mean, what better do you get than that?